From Buffalo Toronto Public Media and WBFO, this is What's Next Producers Picks. Highlights of conversations heard from and on previous shows. This week.
But in many ways, these book bans and even banning or making Black history illegal within school districts are just simply telling Black people that our voices and our lives do not matter.
We hear from LaGarrett King and Dawnavyn James, speaking all things Black nerds. And we end the show with...
I don't care how much money you have, how many degrees you have. We are all a banana slip from being the people that we serve. So we really need to stay humble in that space and try to do the best we can with the gifts that God gave us.
Buffalo Black Achiever Honoree Melissa Archer. I'm Dallas Taylor. Thanks for listening. We start off with a conversation about Black nerds with LaGarrett King, who brings with him Black history educator, researcher, and author of Beyond February, Dawnavyn James.
But for those folks who haven't heard of Black History Nerds Saturday School, tell us a bit about it. Is there a curriculum for it?
Yeah, so I'll give a little backstory for why Black History Nerds. But just Black History Nerds is a professional development sessions that happen every second Saturday of each month, and during Black History Month we hold the sessions every weekend. But during 2020, I received a DM from a classmate who was following my career, and he just pointed out and said, LaGarrett, I know nothing. I know nothing about Black history. And this is a Black guy, right? He's a Black guy. We went to the same school. He was one of our star athletes and went to an SEC school like I did. And he's a pastor now. And he just said, LaGarrett, I know nothing. And I would love for you to tutor me, right, in Black history, right? And during that time, I was extremely busy with all different types of, Black history stuff. And I said, well, what can I do to help him out as well as others, because I understood that he wasn't the only person that, just didn't know anything about Black history. So that's where the idea came from, right? I'm a Black history nerd. Dawnavyn's a Black history nerd. I mean, anything dealing with Black history, we want to know more about and learn deeply. So I came up with the idea of said, hey, well, why don't we have these 1-hour sessions on Saturday mornings? We're just a bunch of nerds that wake up on Saturday mornings to learn about Black history, and nothing. You can grab your breakfast or coffee or lunch or brunch or whatever the case may be, and we just sit down and we celebrate, learning about Black history.
So what are the types of topics that you get into? I mean, because a lot of people will say, well, in school I learned about Benjamin Banneker, I learned about Frederick Douglass, I learned about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, but there's obviously so much more to learn about Black history. So what are the type of topics you get into? Yeah,
so we focus both on, content as well as instructional methods, literacy. So our most recent one dealt with how to teach history through a Afro-Indigenous perspective, right? We've had one this year that looked at imprisonment, right, mm-hmm. and the history of that and what people are doing now. We had a session a few years ago teaching Black history to white people by Dr. Leonard Moore, my undergraduate history professor, and so we've had several different topics that we explore, and even when we focus on content, right, we try to take a different angle to that, because there's one thing about knowing about Dr. Martin Luther King, but really delving into his life. There's one thing about learning about Malcolm X, but really delving into his life. So in the future, we have, this coalition of history teachers in K-12 education, teacher educators who teach teachers, as well as history professors who come on to conduct these series.
Dawnavyn, I wanted to bring you in.
Yeah.
You are elementary school teacher.
Yes, I taught kindergarten.
And you centered Black history into your everyday teaching.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, so something I noticed is that in the curriculum and especially the social studies standards, Black people were missing. Like, you talk about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but what about the other Black people that did things? So I did my best to bring in, like, specifically picture books that center Black history for my students to learn from, and integrating Black history into science and math and literacy as well.
Now, how do you integrate it into science and math?
So, like with science, looking at plants, so bringing in George Washington Carver, learning about living organisms like Ernest Everett Just, who was a biologist. In math, looking at like mathematician of the day. So something as simple as that. Like, it doesn't have to be always so complex. So just really honoring Black mathematicians.
And Dr. King, you call yourself the head nerd in charge. Where's that moniker come from?
So it's a play on Lean On Me, right? So if some of the more seasoned audience members out there ever seen Lean On Me, you kind of know the phrase, right? Some of the younger people are still like, huh, what's going on, and everything like that. And Dawnavyn and our associate director Brittany Jones, they all think I'm gonna mess up one day and
say the wrong thing.
Say
the wrong thing for Lean On Me. So, but no, it's just celebrating, learning, right? We don't have to learn for a purpose, but just for our being and our humanity. And so, as the head nerd in charge, our history nerd in charge, right? I see that as a very important, position for us to kind of push forward the learning of history.
What else are you trying to accomplish within this space?
Wow. So the center has so many things going. One of the things that I'm really excited about is our micro credential that we are, hopefully going to launch in 2024 for teachers, right? So there's several states, including New York State, that have what I would call Black history mandates in their laws, meaning that each school district is supposed to teach Black history, whether it's a singular class, an elective, or
and that's
within
every district within the state.
Yes. According to the Amistad law that New York State passed, I want to say 1994 or 2024, something around that line. But what the problem is, a lot of teachers lack either knowledge or they're scared to teach Black history in a certain type of way, right? So the micro credential through the center is supposed to help those teachers kind of approach and broach those topics that may be deemed a little difficult for them, as well as where to start, because even your best history teachers have a large gap concerning Black history education.
Why would a teacher be scared to teach Black history or teach Black history in a certain way?
Yeah, so several different concepts lie here, right? Number one, there are some tough historical things that has happened to Black folk, right, throughout our history, right? And some teachers are afraid to misspeak on certain topics, right? So whether it's slavery or whether it's a civil rights movement or whether it's just anything concerning lynching or even just talking about persons such as Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, et cetera, et cetera. I think the biggest and then we're looking at history teachers that pride themselves in knowing history. But when you kind of present things that they don't know, then they become a little shy and like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I've been teaching history for 20 plus years, right? So there is a kind of disconnect between what society and teachers know about Black people, and that's because we have a poor Black history education in this country.
Dawnavyn, do you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, I've been doing just some work with different districts, and teachers just, again, like LaGarrett said, afraid to say the wrong thing and don't want to inappropriately teach, the enslavement of Africans and Black people here in America. So they're just really, like, restricting themselves from diving in. Is
there a right way to teach Black history, and is there a wrong way to teach Black history?
That's an interesting question, and typically we don't deal with dichotomies in terms of right or wrong, but yeah, right? There's a wrong way. Like, for example, right, there has been instances all over the country about teaching slavery through mock slave auctions, right?
Right.
Where, hey, there's a Black kid, or there are kids in general who are playing slaves. The other people in the class are playing quote unquote masters or whatever, and they're feeling and they're touching, and they're learning history in that particular way, right? There's been places where kids picking cotton in a cotton field, and slavery math problems that focus on violence and all that stuff, right? So
do you object to that type of teaching?
Yes, because I think in many ways that brings additional harm to to Black students, right? And saying to other students who look at this as something appropriate, right? Now, the slavery math problems inherently are not wrong, but the way in which they constructed those math problems could be very problematic. Oh, go ahead. I can do the proper way a little bit later if you have the question.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
So when we're looking at the most appropriate way to teach Black history, I think that requires kind of a rethinking of what history is. I don't.
Oh, is this the teaching Black history versus teaching traditional history?
Yeah. So it's this concept where typically in our schools, and this has been researched ever since the early 20th century. So, from scholars, for so long ago that the history curriculum has always, our history textbooks have always featured a Eurocentric way of approaching and looking at history, right? So, even up until 1976, you still had disparaging comments about Black people in textbooks, saying that they were happy being slaves and they loved their slave masters, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been in my lifetime, right? So you're looking at a history curriculum that has really focused on white men who were heterosexual and who were land-owning, able-bodied, et cetera, and many times, Black people's perspectives and other people's perspectives were not even thought about, like within that. So when we think about Black history is really unique because Black history is essentially learning history from Black people's perspectives, their voices, and their epistemologies / ways of knowing, right? And that looks totally different from the history curriculum in which we teach now.
I wanted to get your thoughts on censorship, bannings. Where are we going as a country when we are deciding to do this? And the collective we.
Yeah. It's really, distraught when I think about it because, first of all, we had this manufactured crisis, right, that was not happening, in many schools, probably in barely any schools in, our country. But we do have a history of cultural wars, and cultural wars win elections, right? And that has always, happened since the late 19th century. But in many ways, these book bans and even banning or making Black history illegal within school districts are just simply telling Black people that our voices and our lives do not matter, right? And the most interesting concept is, the fight against CRT, but the most ironic aspect of CRT is that this is what CRT is for, right?
Right.
To examine, all these kind of racist, institutionalized, systemic practices to exclude, Black people and other people of color from the body politic, right? So it's a real interesting, phrase because in many ways when we look at different book bans, a lot of these book bans just have Black characters in it, right?
Mm-hmm. Or Black authors.
Or Black authors, right? With limited, access to talking about quote unquote race and racism. Although, some of them do, but I believe that book that talked about Black hair, Black girls' hair was banned, and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, no one sees this, right? Mm-hmm. But it gives it continues to impress upon Black Americans that your ideas, your knowledge, your perspectives are not wanted in different spaces around this country.
Donovan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I expected it to just be books that center just Black historical events and people, but it is just kids being kids. Like there's a book called Crown about a Black boy getting his hair cut at the barbershop that's banned, but we can't find like example, like why are these books being banned? So as LaGarrett said, it's just like Black characters being banned, and just showing kids that even just you going to get your hair cut is something to be banned.
Yeah. How do we combat this? How do we fight against this? It's not. It's got to be. Seems like it's got to be something we have to do every day.
In a simple sense, we need politicians fighting against politicians. I haven't really seen that from, a particular party that begs Black people to vote for them every single presidential cycle. I'm sure in local spaces that may happen or whatever, but I just haven't seen it, right? But what's most interesting is that we are only a few years removed from what people have called racial reckoning, right? Particularly in the summer of 2020. And we had all these particular, allies and co-conspirators. And as soon as all of these, laws started to pop up, and it just seems like those people disappeared. And all the promises of 2020 just disappeared in a snap, right? And that's very disheartening because the power is in the people. And I truly believe that the people that are fighting against this are the minority. I think I read a article that in one school district, it's like one or two people who have
all this power.
That have banned all these particular books, and that's just not right, right? So if we had, and if I can be frank, if we had white people that cared enough to fight against these particular things, because Black folk have been fighting against these spaces, but if we had those same people who did all this performative justice within the summer of 2020 come out and fight this, then I think things would be a little bit better. But it seems like just people just raised their hands and they walked away.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they put back on the kente cloth that they borrowed and came back and started fighting again. So is this tied into critical race theory? Because it seems like the hysteria over critical race theory has died down somewhat, but it's kind of morphed into this, well, we don't want you to read these kind of books.
Yeah, well, I think, we need scholars and people and lawyers to continue to examine what's going on through a CRT lens, right? And just help people kind of understand the language, help them understand how the theory is used to explain different phenomenon, and clarify a lot of different things, right? Because I don't think that people who have a agenda to discredit something so I'll say this: I've been a professor for, oh my goodness, like 12 years, right? I've been in education for 24 almost years, and I've studied critical race theory in school, as well as I've wrote a few articles focused on the CRT, and it's so much that I don't understand about CRT, right? And I actually take the time to read the most important literature that is situated, and CRT is still pretty relatively young in terms of education for us to really grasp all that other stuff. But to have people that haven't read as much as other scholars have read to dictate what people believe, I think is really sickening, and we need to kind of reevaluate who we listen to and call experts on these particular issues.
You feel the same way, Donovan?
Yeah, I think banning the books is really about control, but I say read them anyway, so.
Can you give an example of trying to find that clarity to clarify these things?
Yeah, so I think particularly let's say one of the biggest principles of CRT is that race is permanent, right? is something that's permanent in our society. And I think people, they people who believe in the goodness of the United States or believe in the goodness of people just simply don't want to believe that, you know, racism as a system is still present in our society. CRT scholars try to highlight how racism is still part of our society and how it restricts aspects of people of color, right? And you know, of course, this can be, you know, with the book ban, it can be a perfect way to explain how, you know, racism, particularly systemic racism, because if you are banning books within a system, a school system, if you're telling teachers that they can't teach certain concepts around racism, a system, right? If you have government agencies are, you know, saying it's against the law to have DEI offices and policies, you know, that's a system, right? I think it's really important for people to realize, oh, so this is how, right? Because if the majority of DEI officers are people of color, oh, now they don't have a job. Oh, who's going to hurt? You know, if teachers are being punished for teaching about race and racism, typically it's the black teachers, right? And now, you know, you have less black teachers in the classroom. So all these things are cycles that systems play into racial equality. And if you get rid of those particular aspects, then, you know, then of course, racism is permanent. And even in our gerrymandering, right? You know, you have places like,
well, there's this case in Georgia right now.
Yeah, Georgia, but even let's take Mississippi as an example. Mississippi, almost 40% black. If not the majority population in the state of Mississippi, and if 90+% of black people vote blue, then at best Mississippi is supposed to be a purple state.
Yeah,
at best.
Right.
So we have to examine, well, what policies are making Mississippi just a strictly red state, right? And typically we'll see the congressional areas drawn in there and et cetera, right? So all those things are important for us to understand and not take for face value.
Where do you see black culture heading? Not just hip hop culture, but black culture generally speaking.
I don't know. I see black culture just dominating, really. Like, I see a lot of blackness, and I surround myself with a lot of blackness, and I try to be as black as possible so that black culture can be the dominant culture.
Do you have an issue with other cultures adopting certain aspects of our culture?
Not necessarily an issue. I mean, just give us our credit, really. I mean, if you give us our credit, because we know what you're doing. Like, right. It's not like you're hiding. Yeah, we see you. So just give us our credit and be honest about that. Like, you did not do that. That was us.
Dr. King, how you feel about it?
You know what's interesting? Black folk are so, creative. So when we see...
And resourceful.
Yeah, and very resourceful, right? You know, and we have to let the kids do their thing. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, even as I said, you know, oh man, I don't understand it. It's not for me to understand. It's not, you know, as my parents didn't understand NWA and didn't understand, you know, A Tribe Called Quest or anything like that. You know, it's not for us to understand. I think, you know what I'm saying, we're getting to some more futuristic stuff, I think. You know, whatever that means, right?
There is an Afro-futuristic movement. I don't understand it, but I'd like to understand it.
Well, you know what I'm saying? You got, you know, punk rockers, and you got, you know, those who do art, and you have people who are kind of reimagining the future for black folk, right? I think when we think about black future, and I'm thinking this because that's our next conference in 2024, Black to the Future. But when we think about black futures, we have to think about people are saying, okay, so what would society look like if white folk just left us alone? What would society look like without racism, anti-blackness, sexism, et cetera, And I think that's where, like, a lot of our young people are kind of thinking now. There's some excellent people that are doing some wonderful work, but really and truly, it's about reevaluating our past and seeing how we can push forward. And yes, what I'm saying, we do have the the cool colors and the different wear and the spaceships and all that other good stuff. But really, it's just kind of reimagining what would society look like if racism and anti-blackness just stopped.
That was Thomas O'Neill White with LaGarrett King and Dawnavyn James. And we end the show with Jay Moran speaks with Buffalo Black Achiever honoree and Chief Operating Officer of the Buffalo Urban League, Melissa Archer.
What brought you to our attention is that you were one of the Buffalo Black Achievers for 2023. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was shocked and very humbled, and especially when we had the actual event, and I'm looking at the bios of all of my co-winners, if you will, and I was like, I'm in the same league as these people. It's, oh my goodness. So made a lot of friends, a lot of connections, partnerships, collaborations. It was a lot of card swapping that night. It was a lot of fun. The event was really a lot of fun, and it was great to be amongst, all of that talent and passion and hard work.
Yeah, if you don't mind, maybe explore that just a little bit. Like you said, talent and passion, those are the two words you used. So you saw that among these people. There must have been a great energy in the air.
Oh, it was electric.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure walking down the red carpet and then being interviewed probably had something to do with that. Being in the VIP section, but it was really great to see, fellow community across all sectors, but fellow community members that have been recognized for the hard work that they've been doing, and they're not looking for the recognition, but to be recognized, it just made you feel like extra special and really. Really push that, that drive to continue, to do the work, because obviously this work is so important no matter what the work is. And to continue with that with more, additional passion,
right.
I got to get this done. And so that was probably really exciting to, just to be amongst all those other people that are doing the same thing that you're doing, but just in a different manner.
Right. Did anybody catch you, not catch you off guard necessarily, but just the idea that, wow, you do that, you do this. Were there those types of people that jump out and to your mind?
There was a couple that I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing.
Right.
I didn't even know this was a service or something that was offered, and then definitely make sure I got their contact information so we can explore and see how it can enhance our, service provision over at the Urban League. So I was just like, oh, let me just see. I'm always looking. What I thought was really a nice touch was they had sign language interpreters there.
Ah.
And at first I thought someone was just being very animated and talking, because I was like, sometimes I talk with my hands. But I was like, that was very, very thoughtful.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that. So I was like, this is a nice event all around. The food was great. The program was great. Everything was wonderful. Yeah. And
what was it like when they notified you? Hey, you're one of the achievers this year.
I thought they sent it to the wrong person. At first I was like, what is this? And I'm like, why? What have I done? It's just been so busy. Like, do I really qualify for this? And so that's what went through my mind. And then I went to, my team at the Buffalo Urban League. It's like, oh my goodness, look at this. This is amazing. And was a little shy at first about it, but very excited and very honored and humbled to even be in that space.
And I definitely want to talk about your work at the Buffalo Urban League, but I want to talk about your journey a little bit, because it's a fascinating journey to this point. Because I would like to think that if someone said I was the chief operating officer of anything, probably one of the first things, oh, you must come from a business background, right? Right? Am I right around? Right. But your background isn't. Well, first, mental health is a big part of who you are,
yes.
But you started off as an RN.
Yes, started off as an RN, as a registered nurse, and then joined the military. I was in the Army National Guard, and was a nurse for a little bit. I like to say I'm 21, and I've been a nurse for a few years. But I was a nurse for a few years, and just started seeing how can we service patients a little bit better than just patching up, the physical self. How can we make sure social, emotionally, we're able to, provide more to them. So maybe they're not coming to the ER so frequently, or maybe, they have more empowerment and ownership and accountability for their own health care. And just seeing the struggles, and it's not just the patients, though. I started seeing my coworkers.
Really?
And I was like, we have to do something a little bit different. And I said, how can I be part of the solution and not the problem? So initially I was going to go to medical school, and congrats to all doctors. I have all the respect, but 8 years is a long time, 4 years of med school and then 4 years of residency. And I already was a registered nurse. And so I was like, oh, I didn't know we had two amazing programs here in Buffalo, one at Duville and one at UB for, a psychiatric nurse practitioner program. So went to Duville and was very excited. And I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? But learned so much and realized I was like, I am in the space I was supposed to be in. And so my thoughts are, how can I help people find the best versions of themselves, whatever that may be, and help them, have a little bit more control and empowerment and acknowledgement of their best self. And because sometimes it's not enough just to give somebody the tools. You have to teach them how to use it.
Right.
And then you have to provide that support just in case those tools break down. So I'm like, I just want to be in that space to help as much as I can and however the greatest capacity that I could. So that's why I went back to school. And when you're grown, going back to school is very different than when you're 19 and 20,
Yes,
21 years old. So, that was a bit of a challenge. And then my last semester, I was called upon with the Urban League to help run this program called New York Project Hope. And initially was just I'll be a part-time crisis counselor. And I did help with like getting resumes and just people that I knew in the community that I knew would be a great fit for certain positions. And then they came back and said, no, we want you to run the program. I was like, I'm in school. My last semester, I got to finish. There's a lot of time and energy, tears, sweat, and money put into this program. I have to finish it. But I jumped in. They worked with my schedule and haven't looked back. And I just have, I'm very... believe in God and very faith-based. And I do believe that, if we just sit still and be quiet at times, God will tell you the path you're supposed to go on and where you're supposed to be. And, for me to pull up and go back to school and do all these different things, something was pushing me and I didn't quite know what, but I knew something was. And I trusted that voice. And the Urban League was just part of that. And the work that we did with New Year Project Hope was just something that was just out of this world. Because we were responding, and what the program was, it was a FEMA-funded program to provide emotional support, helpline, resources, coping strategies for this particular one, for New York residents that have experienced, a mental health fallout because of COVID, and who didn't. Right. Isolation and the loss, right. Whether it was the loss of a job, a loved one, whatever, and so many other things. And so, our team provided that. The Buffalo Urban League team, we provided that. It was like a team of 21 folks that were trained by Office of Mental Health and SAMHSA, and they were paraprofessionals. Some were board certified or social workers, but these are community members, trusted community members that people know that were heavily trained to be crisis counselors, and we responded. And I believe we shouldn't tell ourselves how well we're doing. You let other people evaluate and, basically do a performance evaluation of how you're doing. And the response we got from the community of the services we were providing was absolutely just mind-boggling. It was amazing. And we did so much, and so that, we were in the midst of that with COVID, and then we had some other tragic events that happened that we responded to, first responders. And, it just continued on until, FEMA decided or has declared that COVID was no longer in this crisis mode as of December of last year. So the New York Project Hope program was ended. But we were told that it was the first FEMA program to be continued in the post-crisis phase.
Wow.
So Office of Mental Health picked it up, and now it's called Buffalo Hope. And they're still doing the same thing, providing emotional support helpline resources. I'm there, in schools with seniors doing like mental health wellness events. It's so much, and I'm just so honored to be when we worked together, we were a team. We supported each other. We very creative, and it's just to be a part of something like this is just like a dream come true. So to me, it's really my ministry.
We're talking with Melissa Archer this morning. She is the Chief Operating Officer for the Buffalo Urban League, and she, as she just outlined for us, quite the experience for a young individual to talk about here. I want to jump back because you intrigued me about a couple of things about your RN experience.
Okay, yes.
And one is what you saw, like you said, in your colleagues, and how that process, that grind, whatever you want to call it, of having to deal with multiple patients who are in a variety of different levels of need, how it could wear on them. Can you talk about that a little bit, what you saw?
Oh, yes. So surprisingly, my thesis for when I got my master's in the psych and P was compassion, fatigue, and burnout. And I remember my chair, she said, you didn't realize when you started this process that this thesis topic would be so pertinent. And I just saw like people, especially during COVID, the fallout from just people just being exhausted, tired, sometimes understaffed, sometimes feeling underappreciated, and they were just tired. And so, things come out, that people have to find a way to cope. And it was getting very difficult because a lot of us nurses and anybody in healthcare, nurses, you're the social worker. You're you're doing a lot of different things. But how do you do that when, you're struggling to even just get out of bed? And so when I saw this, and it would affect, their work performance, it would affect patient outcomes, it would affect so many different things. It's like we have to do something a little bit different. So that's why I am a staunch supporter for staff and pouring.
So when you've
into
heard
your
like
staff.
these, different nurses and some of their unions, not necessarily getting into a union thing here, but when they were saying we need staffing levels, you understood that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been in spaces where it's like you're the one, you're the nurse and you may have like 12 patients and they're really acute, they're really sick. And you're like, oh, okay. And you do the best you can because you're in it and you want to provide the best that you can. But, there's also a human being at the end of that, though. At the end of that shift that has to go home and deal with their families and, how physically draining, yes, it's always going to be, but the mental and emotional toll after a while, we really have to look at that and evaluate that so we can make sure we're pouring into our staff, no matter what sector you're working in. You're pouring into your staff so they can really pour into, into the, I don't know if it's the patients, the clients, or the product that you're trying to create that's going to be utilized by a human being. So, in business terms, what is the return on investment?
Right.
So you invest and you get great dividends on the end of it. So, it's just, it's really has pushed me to really like look at how you engage your employees. And, like at the Urban League, we just did an engagement survey, and we're going through a strategic planning and a lot of focus on how can we enhance our employees' experience and trying to be there for them so they can be the best version of themselves so that they can provide that to the community, because you can't give from an empty cup. And I know that sounds cliche, but it is so true.
Sure. And you're maybe a little distant from the RN life now after all of your experience, but I'm sure you probably still have old friends and colleagues that are still involved. Is it getting better, do you think?
I think it's probably about the same because I think a lot of folks have left healthcare because of COVID. Some people have. There's some people go for different careers, like I did, left RN to become a nurse practitioner, or people have retired. So it's a rich opportunity for other people to come in and study and become become an RN, become an LPN, become a CNA, respiratory therapist, whatever the case may be, just, getting in there. But it seems like, I haven't really talked to too many, but I haven't heard anything either way. So.
Okay. And the other part of that equation, that experience that you had that struck me, My parents were going through their later lives just a few years ago, and spent a lot of time in emergency rooms, and saw how that works and how difficult that scene is. And you were talking about how trying to give people some tools, the patients tools that are coming in there, and maybe using the emergency room because they have nowhere else to go. Share with us just a little bit what you saw from these individuals, because like I said, I saw some sad, lonely people from my own my little distance and my little curtain there with my mother or father. What did you see?
Well, sometimes you see folks that are that, like you said, the sad, lonely, or they're reaching out, or they had coming in for anxiety. Is it really because of anxiety, or there's something else going on and it's not being treated or not being addressed, or they are lonely, or it's so individualized, and so something where you really have to assess the patient, see what's going on, and then try to build some wraparound services around them. And if that's their only touch point, because I know sometimes people do use the ER as their primary care, or they come in as a just a function of I'm having some symptoms. If that's a touch point, that would be a great place to just provide whatever tools you can, whatever touch point you can have with them. Provide whatever tools you can to them, and that I know it's a very defined time.
Sure.
And you're there for a very specific reason, but I know sometimes the ERs are packed, and it's just, I think that's just the life of healthcare right now.
Right. I want to jump back because you intrigued me about a couple of things about your RN experience.
Okay. Yes.
And one is what you saw, like you said, in your colleagues, and how that process, that grind, whatever you want to call it, of having to deal with multiple patients who are in a variety of different levels of need, how it could wear on them. Can you talk about that a little bit, what you saw?
Oh, yes. So surprisingly, my thesis for when I got my master's in the psych and P was compassion, fatigue, and burnout. And I remember my chair, she said, you didn't realize when you started this process that this thesis topic would be so pertinent. And I just saw people, especially during COVID, the fallout from just people just being exhausted, tired, sometimes understaffed, sometimes feeling underappreciated, and they were just tired. And so, things come out, that people have to find a way to cope, and it was getting very difficult because a lot of us nurses, and anybody in healthcare, nurses, you're the social worker. You're you're doing a lot of different things, but how do you do that when, you're struggling to even just get out of bed? And so when I saw this, and it would affect, their work performance, it would affect patient outcomes, it would affect so many different things. It's like we have to do something a little bit different. So that's why I am a staunch supporter for staff. And pouring.
So when you've heard
staff,
these, different nurses and some of their unions, not necessarily getting into a union thing here, but when they were saying we need staffing levels, you understood that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been in spaces where it's like you're the one, you're the nurse, and you may have 12 patients, and they're really acute, they're really sick, and you're like, oh, okay, and you do the best you can because you're in it, and you want to provide the best that you can. But there's also a human being at the end of that, though. At the end of that shift, that has to go home and deal with their families, and how physically draining, yes, it's always going to be, but the mental and emotional toll after a while, we really have to look at that and evaluate that, so we can make sure we're pouring into our staff, no matter what sector you're working in. You're pouring into your staff so they can really pour into, into the, I don't know if it's the patients, the clients, or the product that you're trying to create that's going to be utilized by a human being. So, in business terms, what is the return on investment?
Right.
So you invest, and you get great dividends on the end of it. So, it's just, it's really has pushed me to really look at how you engage your employees, and at the Urban League, we just did an engagement survey, and we're going through a strategic planning and a lot of focus on how can we enhance our employees' experience, and trying to, be there for them so they can be the best versions of themselves so that they can provide that to the community. Because you can't give from an empty cup. And I know that sounds cliche, but it is so true.
Sure.
You know.
And you're maybe a little distant from the RN life now after all of your experience, but I'm sure you probably still have old friends and colleagues that are still involved. Is it getting better, do you think?
I think it's probably about the same because I think a lot of folks have left healthcare because of COVID. Some
That's
people
true.
have. There's some people go for different careers, like I did, left RN and become a nurse practitioner, or people have retired. So it's a rich opportunity for, other people to come in and study and become, become an RN, become an LPN, become a CNA, respiratory therapist, whatever the case may be, just, getting in there. But it seems like, I haven't really talked to
Sure.
too many, but I haven't heard anything either way. So.
Okay. And the other part of that equation, that experience that you had that struck me, my parents were going through their later lives just a few years ago and spent a lot of time in emergency rooms and saw how that works and how difficult that scene is. And you were talking about how trying to give people some tools, the patients tools that are coming in there and maybe using the emergency room because they have nowhere else to go. Share with us just a little bit what you saw from these individuals, because like I said, I saw some sad, lonely people from my own my little distance and my little curtain there with my mother or father.
Right.
What did you see?
Well, sometimes you see folks that are that, like you said, the sad, lonely, or they're reaching out, or they had coming in for anxiety. Is it really because of anxiety, or there's something else going on and it's not being treated or not being addressed, or they are lonely, or it's so individualized and so something where you really have to assess the patient, see what's going on, and then try to build some wraparound services around them. And if that's their only touch point, because I know sometimes people do use the ER as their primary care, or they come in as just a function of I'm having some symptoms. If that's a touch point, that would be a great place to just provide whatever tools you can, whatever touch point you can have with them.
Melissa, you were talking about some of the community events or tragedies that we've gone through that you're very sensitive to because of your work and with the Buffalo Urban League, but the one I haven't had a lot of conversation or heard a lot about was the Christmas blizzard. We lost 47 people died during that blizzard, so that was a big event in that regard. But how is that? How is that showing up? What are we seeing? What are we hearing from people, and how that is impacting them?
Oh, again, the people lost a lot. People, like I said,
Sure.
lives were lost. 47 lives were lost. People had damage to their homes. They had damage to their cars. Damage for, some people may have lost their jobs because they couldn't get to work. There's just been a lot of loss and a lot of trauma behind, especially when you have so many tragedies that occurred, and we did, quite a few.
Like COVID,
back to back.
May 14th. Yeah.
A beloved pediatrician.
My.
There was just a lot of different things that occurred, and some that may not even have made the news, like COVID or something else. But a lot of different things that occurred, and then for this to happen. And so I know, Buffalo, it was Buffalo Hope at the time? Yeah, it was Buffalo Hope. But the Urban League itself responded we collaborated with a group and went door to door.
After the blizzard.
Well, when they opened up the streets, of course, when they opened up the streets.
Wasn't easy getting around.
Yeah, they opened up, lifted the travel ban. We went door to door. So there were some individuals that were mowing, and that were that were shoveling the snow. We were doing wellness checks, making sure people were alive, and making sure, like, what do you need? How can I help you? How are you feeling right now? So the Buffalo Urban League team was part of that. And some people would be like, I ran out of diapers. So we would go back. Our base was at Dawnavyn Grider. Go back and report that, and then they would get them some diapers or get them wipes. I mean, it was a very good collaboration. And then another thing that we did was provided a family day for families around just different ways to cope. So I think there was a laughter therapy session. It was all kind of fun stuff that was going on. And then there were tables that set up, community members, community organizations tables that set up to give information just on various topics, mental health, housing, just various things that community members could utilize. And then along with that, then we had it was like 11-person panel to talk about the mental health fallout of the blizzard. And it was amazing. It really was, because we were able to just impart some information to community members that maybe they didn't have before. And now, I want to see. I'm interested to see, our winter is coming back up.
Yes, it is.
So I'm interested to see, I'm going to be checking with my teams to see, are people experiencing more anxiety because they're wondering, is it going to happen again? And are we prepared, So, just having those conversations and maybe helping them navigate that. So, yeah, because we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that. So.
Absolutely. And I guess it goes without saying, we talked about the people that died, but just the idea that what a sense of, horror is probably too strong a word maybe, but that blizzard was like for some people. Is that what we're hearing? That just, there was just this, it's cold, you can't see out in front of your house.
Yeah.
What's going on next? Was that the root of a lot of this?
Yeah, and not being able to have that control. I know for me, we couldn't even get out the house. The snow was like halfway to 3/4 up. You couldn't get out the house. It was a concern of if somebody had a medical emergency, how would that look? How would that play out? And I think I even tried to shovel for a little bit. I think it was like that Friday, and the wind it whipped us up, and then you couldn't see anything. And I was like, oh, we have to go in the house, because if a tree branch was in that cloud, we wouldn't see it. And then next thing you know, we would be, probably in some trouble. So I think people just wrapping themselves around that, because Buffalo, we are used to snow.
Sure.
And but this was different. This was even worse than the blizzard of 77. I was told, because I guess in 77 we didn't have the wind, which did the snow drifts and all of that. So, so I think there's people are just dealing with and the lack of control and the loss again, and just the trauma of it all. That's what people are probably dealing with. Yeah.
Moving on just a little bit, you're also involved in trying to set up I guess I'll use the term clinic, for lack of a better term. I may not be the exact right word. Right on Genesee Street in Hickory.
Genesee and Hickory, yes. It was
the location. Is that strategic? Is that
360 Genesee?
Yeah.
Well, my aunt is a pioneer. I call her my mama, but she is a pioneer. She's been a psychiatrist for many years, and she started a program called the Census Foundation. And it was like a wraparound program for at-risk youth, and taught them everything from, and Census is an acronym, from social skills, education, nutrition, it was spirituality when it wasn't in the schools, because you can't put that in the schools, but entrepreneurship, and then social responsibility.
Okay. And
really, a really engaging program, really successful program. And but then COVID happened, so kind of you table a lot of things. But with all of our families, healthcare, careers, it was like, well, we can do something different with that. So they started the process about 2 years ago, and it's called the Census Medical Wellness Center.
Oh, okay.
Right at 360 Genesee, and so they started it, and she's a psychiatrist, so. And I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and initially I just graduated in 2021. So initially, for the first 3,000 hours for a nurse practitioner, you have to have I think it's called a collaborating physician. So it's like, oh, that works well. That we kind of, let's try it and see what happens. So so they did it, ran forward with it, and initially it'll be like a mental health focus, but we want to have mental and physical health, because sometimes mental health patients, that might be their only contact. So if they can get a physical, get their immunizations at the same time they're coming to get their counseling, whether it's on their own or court mandated, whatever, that might be a good touch point that we can help people that maybe wouldn't get helped.
Yeah, what about the location? Is it intentional in the sense that we're talking about an underserved area?
Absolutely.
It's interesting to hear you talking. Because on one side you've had this experience where you've been hands-on, RN, National Guard. I mean, all this, but yet you seem to also have this big picture look at things as well with your work at Buffalo Urban League. The census clinic hasn't opened yet, hasn't started yet. So we don't know, like you said, what the community is going to need and where it's going to take us. But do you have the sense that those types of targeted locations are going to be a key to maybe, rejuvenating some of these neighborhoods that really could use a boost?
Yes. Reinvesting in them, yes.
Yeah.
And showing them that somebody does care, somebody from the community is here, that grew up in this community and know what it is coming back to kind of like give you that hands up, and hopefully you can be in this space yourself to do the same in the future. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big picture, I think it's because I know that I've been blessed. And I always tell people we're a banana slip away from being the people we serve. I don't care how much money you have, how many degrees you have. We are all a banana slip from being the people that we serve. So we really need to stay humble in that space, and try to do the best we can with the gifts that God gave us, so that we can help the next person. Because how many cars can you buy? How many, it's like at some point for me, I'm not speaking for anybody else, I have to have more purpose. And I love the thought of helping someone look in the mirror or look at life or the devil or whatever that's keeping them from their greatness and say, you're not going to win.
That was Jay Moran with the Buffalo Black Achiever Honoree and Chief Operating Officer of the Buffalo Urban League, Melissa Archer. We thank you for joining us. This has been Producer's Picks. We would like to thank our guests, LaGarrett King, Dawnavyn James, and Melissa Archer. If you missed anything and you'd like to hear it again, a reminder that this program is a podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast or the Amplified BTPM app. And each episode is also online on demand at WBFO.org. I'm Dallas Taylor. Thank you for listening.
This is the Buffalo-Toronto Public Media History Bite, bringing you a peek into significant historical events for the week of November 27th through December 3rd. I'm your host and program director, Tom Barrich. November 27th, 1917. The TV host of the Howdy Doody Show was born on this day. Robert Emil Smith, also known as Buffalo Bob Smith, played the part ending his TV run in 1960, but continued with live performances which evolved into, quote, adult-friendly versions of Buffalo Bob that had a more nostalgic theme to it. The University at Buffalo's men's basketball team played its very first game on December 1st, 1905. They played against Cornell at Convention Hall. They lost, unfortunately, with a valiant effort, and the final score, believe it or not, Cornell 27, UB 23. Games certainly have changed. And the famous and now legendary Pierce Arrow Motor Car Company incorporated on December 2nd, 1916. They had a good run and sold most of their assets at auction in 1938. You've been listening to the WBFO History Bite. Discover more stories about Western New York's past on the Buffalo History Museum's website. Learn more at buffalohistory.org. For Buffalo-Toronto Public Media, I'm Tom Barrich.